Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of SBJ Live. I am Dan Kaufman with Sports Business Journal. I am here just for the introduction, so you only see a little bit of me before I flip it over to our moderator, Cameron McDonald. But as always, we have a great lineup for you here at SBJ Live. And as always, I go through a few of the logistical things that I find make for the best experience for you all, the audience. So just bear with me if you've heard them before. If you've not heard them, pay attention for just a second so that I can make sure that you get the best out of this experience. So two most important things. One, there's a chat bubble on the right-hand side. As you're coming in, you can see that some people are saying hello. Thank you, Georgios, for saying hello from Norway. Appreciate you attending. Say hello there. Let us know who you are, where you're coming from, and what you do. And if you see people who you know, go ahead and message them back. We really encourage that here. Right next to the chat bubble is a questions bubble, also on your bottom right-hand side. That's where you should submit your questions that you want to make sure that Cameron gets to our panelists. And don't wait till the end. There is no specific Q&A portion of this. Make sure you're submitting your questions in real time as they come into your mind. And you can also upvote questions. So monitor the questions bubble and upvote questions that you want to make sure that we do our best to get to. We'll go for about 40, maybe 45 minutes. If there's just a ton of questions, we'll go a little bit longer, but just know that we should get you out of here in about 40 minutes. Okay, this is Redefining Talent Development for the Global Football Market. It is presented by Kitman Labs. Thank you so much to Kitman for the support. It's my pleasure to introduce Cameron McDonald. Cameron is coming from our office in London, our sister company Leaders, and Cameron is a perfect person to moderate this session. Cameron, thank you so much.
Thanks very much for that lovely introduction, Dan. And thank you to all of our panelists as well for joining us today. As you mentioned, a really exciting topic and a really timely topic as well to be discussing in terms of making the most of talent development, which has become increasingly important in global football. Just to set the scene, I would like to come round to all of our panelists just to briefly give an overview of your roles and responsibilities at your respective organizations. I'm going to start with you, Stephen, as the partner of this chat.
Yeah, well, I think my role is pretty simple. The CEO and founder of Kitman Labs, and I think I get the luxury of walking into the clubs with some of these great teams that we're talking with today and others around the world, and really taking a big picture view of what we're doing, looking at the strategy for what does talent development mean for them, what are they trying to get out of that, what are the most important questions that they want to answer in relation to talent development. What does their current strengths and weaknesses across their, academy and youth systems look like today? How are they creating alignment from their first team to their academy teams? What types of data are going to be needed to answer some of those questions? And then, really breaking that down into, okay, well, how are we going to do that? How are we going to collect that? How are we going to utilize that? How are we going to operationalize that every day? And then how are we looking to innovate and progress? So I have an incredibly fun job. I get to get in and talk about the big picture of this and then bring a lot of other people with me that can then go and turn that into actions every day.
Fantastic. Well, great start. Ian, I'm going to come to you next.
Hi, afternoon, everybody. Great to see you all. I'm Ian Buckman. I'm the Academy Manager at Brighton Hove Albion. I've been in the coaching for 30 odd years, a couple of years working in the States and also a period of time here. My role at Brighton is sort of transition from a head of coaching role into academy manager role, sort of overseeing the program. We have pre-academy starting from sort of under 7, under 8 through to under 21. So everything essentially below the first team level. We've sort of transitioned through academy statuses over the years and moved to a new training facility and the progression of the first team to the Premier League. So we try and provide support to help facilitate that and produce as many players as we can through a system.
I'm going to come to you next, John.
Hi everyone, my name's John Hunter Barrett. I'm the Academy Manager for football at Wolverhampton Wanderers. I've been at the club now for 14 years in July, so quite a long time and seen many transitions of the football club and seeing it evolving from Premier League right down to League One and then back up the pyramid to the Premier League and competing now at that level. Like Ian, we're Category 1 Academy and I oversee all technical aspects of the player, the coach, and that side of development. Yeah, that's me.
And last but of course by no means least, Matt.
Thanks, Karen. Good to meet everyone. Thanks for having us. So Head of sporting strategy at Feyenoord, which is a team in the Netherlands competing in the Eredivisie. I'm responsible for setting and managing the sporting plans, projects, initiatives, working with department heads. So whether that's first team head coach or heads of academy, like these two here, and leadership that really try and take us closer to the goals set by the board. Before this role, I was working in a sports leadership advisory space with Bloom Sports Partners and Sportsology before that. Been lucky enough to work on projects across the NBA, the NFL, MLS and NWSL most recently as well. So yeah, good to be here.
Brilliant, and probably a great place to start with you, Matt, given that history. I'm quite interested to hear you describe sort of how your club is using data and how you're sort of taking advantage of it to identify promising players.
Yeah, so clubs like ours, we're not really in the 1% who can, comfortably buy Champions League ready players, which is a competition that we competed in this year, and our ambition is to be here every year, which means we need to attract and develop players with Champions League potential rather than the ability to perform now. And how we do that is really a combination of eyes, so the live scouting element of that, so gathering intel, understanding the player's background and whether they could assimilate into a country where actually English isn't the first language. And thirdly, the numbers aspect, so the data behind that, and understanding, particularly, there's so much data that's available, but at this level, it's not really a question of good and bad players. It's more right or wrong players for the environment that we're in, and how we kind of manage the data that we have and use it is really important. Now, when it comes to talent development, for us, that's things like biological age, learning ability, physical potential. We have something that we call kind of the grit factor, which is our perseverance in combination with a passion for a long-term goal. And I think if you can get smart around being able to identify what level of data and things that go into those things, it allows you to just make more informed decisions, which again is something that, no one has ever said, give me less information to make a decision. So, and that's where we stand on it, really.
And Ian, coming to you, would you say that reflects your experience in terms of how Brighton are using data to identify players outside of the academy to bring them there, but also within the academy to understand who the real gems are?
Yeah, certainly. I think from outside the academy, I think that's very reflective of what we do. I think we all sort of share sort of similar models and frameworks in terms of how we try and go about that. I think within the academy, we sort of have a very good opportunity to progress at the football club because we have a very strong alignment from top to bottom. From the first team, the expectations. We're very fortunate that everyone works in very close proximity here. So for us, it's quite easy for us to sort of shape the progress through the football club. We would code our playing philosophy. We would have profiles that run from 9 to 21 that link closely with our first team profiles. We would share the profiles between coaching and recruitment across both spaces in terms of academy and the first team. That allows us to do a lot of work around sort of comparative data also, sort of around players and squads and different phases and how we're progressing, and allow us to track development of players through the system. I think we're very fortunate with the football intelligence platform in terms of what that provides for us. We're able to sort of track our coaching delivery and feedback to the players on what they've had year in, year out. One of our sort of main priorities is to do what we say we do. And for us, the best way to demonstrate that is to evidence that, and that's where the data becomes key for us.
And a good time to fold in Stephen shortly with the mention of the football intelligence platform. But just before we do, John, would you sort of agree with what's been said so far? Is that similar to your experience?
Yeah, I think the only thing maybe I would add to that from a developmental perspective, data and insights are quite encouraging for our coaches and our recruiters to know that we're actually delivering the right thing, to meet the needs of what the modern game's actually looking like and what it's going to look like, to meet the needs of the players that are actually in the environment, and I suppose sometimes to take away biases that you may have on the eye from a coaching and development perspective.
Oh, fantastic. Stephen, coming to you, we're really lucky to have your sort of cross-club, cross-league perspective, sort of hearing these conversations and lots of different input. From your perspective, from a Kitman Labs perspective, what factors would you say have brought about this change in how leagues and clubs are looking at talent ID and talent development?
I mean, listen, the growth that we're seeing in global sport, in terms, across lots of different paradigms, is really driving this. We look at the cost of talent, right? We're seeing record transfer fees every year, and that's becoming unattainable for everybody. Like Matt mentioned it, right? Not every club is a 1%er, right? And when we look at even the split of that talent and where that money is being spent, I think over 50% of the money spent on transfer fees globally last year was spent in the UK alone. That means that there's lots of teams, there's lots of leagues that are being priced out of the market. And how do you that doesn't stop them from wanting to be competitive. That makes things really difficult. And even within that, when you look at the split of the amount of money spent from a transfer fee perspective across the top 20 clubs, let's say in the UK, it's a small pocket that the vast majority of that money is going to, and that's not that is not precluding certain teams from wanting to be successful and wanting to be competitive, and they have to find smarter ways to do that. And it means that finding the right raw ingredients as early as you can, and the right fit, not whether they're good or bad, like Matt mentioned as well, finding them earlier, understanding from your club's perspective, what does that mean for you, being able to then turn that into to objectify that, nurture them through your process. That is key.
I think it's really interesting here because we're talking about something that is necessarily quite a long-term project in a business that, as we all know, can often be very, very short-term. I think what I'd ask next to Ian, Matt, and John is what kinds of key infrastructure and processes have you had to put in place to support that talent development pipeline that might not have been there before in sort of recent years? I'm going to start with you, Matt.
Yeah, for us, I think for the level we're at, our infrastructure, physical infrastructure and facilities were really strong. Our academy building was built in 2018, so it was relatively fit for purpose and still is. I think for us, it was more around the processes element. So fundamentally having a clear understanding of our club vision and mission, and then breaking that down into our vision on football. So general intentions, principles. Actually, up until 3-4 years ago, we never had that. And you could see that in the kind of style that we played from first team level down. The next part of that is all around what's our vision on players. So again, that's what Ian was talking about around the player profiles, the basic skills that they need as citizens within society as well, and then how we identify the right kinds of players for our ecosystem. But then once you've got those players in, you need to have a really strong vision on developing players. So we have our head of methodology did a great job of creating what we call these learning lines. So depending where you're at within the academy system, almost depends on, are you being taught how to train? Is it how to play in our system? Is it how to battle? Is it how to win? And that's kind of forms the basis of our annual plans. And a good example could be, at 17, 18, we try and teach them how to battle. That might actually mean that when we have, certain competition games or whatever, we might actually try and encourage the referee to kind of make some tough decisions against our players to try and help develop that element of cognitive management around bad referees. Once we kind of get an understanding of what those learning lines are, we then look at the training accents. So what are the programs and training themes on a annual basis, 6 monthly basis, but also a weekly basis? We'll send, as I'm sure the guys do as well, a weekly intentions program with clips from best practice from around the world, and they're playing on TVs throughout the academy all day, so they can start to see what good looks like as we're really thoughtful around what we're developing in that area. Then the final piece of it is around the individual player development plans. So if you view those things as a bit of a triangle, adding clarity at all those stages is really important. But the context has to come first.
And it's a good point you make. And I sort of want to loop back as well to something that Stephen said before coming to you, Ian, because, as Stephen rightly mentions, we've seen the money across football in terms of transfers massively explode over recent years. How has that impacted your planning year on year? And have you found that you've had to be more agile in terms of implementing your talent development pipeline? Or is it about sticking to what you know and what you know works in spite of sort of changing criteria around you?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both, Cameron. I think it's knowing what we're good at and sort of maintaining that and sustaining that. And I think at the same time, a big part of our football club is also that willingness to continue to grow and develop. So I think it's a little bit of both, in truth. I think we've faced several challenges in sort of recent years. The UK coming out of the European Union and Brexit has been a challenge for us. We used to be able to bring in players from the continent at the age of 16, and you now can't do that to 18. So there's a premium around sort of national players in the UK right now, which has brought a great deal of challenge. Financial fair play rules, for the football clubs are obviously very prevalent at the moment with the situation in the Premier League. And, there's certainly things that are having an impact. And I think you look around the game, certainly in the Premier League at the moment, a lot of clubs are trying to produce young players and give young players the opportunity, which is fantastic for us in the academy system. I think partly here at Brighton at the moment, we're experiencing our first year playing in Europe. So for us, we've got the increased demands of number of games. It's a much larger squad for some of those games. We help facilitate training. We're very fortunate that Roberto De Zerbi, our first team manager, has academy players virtually every day over there with them. And again, that all sorts of helps with that production line. We're trying to produce players for Brighton. If we can't, we're trying to produce players for the game. And as Matt said, I think outside of that, we have a duty of care and a responsibility for all the young people in our care. And we hope that they leave a better person at the end of the day as well. And a big part of what we do is for the football club from a footballing context, but also for our community and being good role models in that community and creating a sustainable base for the football club for the long term.
And it's a great point you mentioned there to bring it back to, that ultimately there is that duty of care. And I think often we can talk about, developing talent as almost sort of a commodity, but it's a great point to mention. I mean, coming to you, John, is that something you would share in terms of sort of growing talent for the team, but also growing talent for the market and the wider game?
Yeah, for sure. I think first of all, Ian and Matt both make very interesting points. I think in our environment now, we're even more accountable for what we spend. So we're more accountable for what we spend in terms of our annual budget on developing players that are in our environment for the wider game and for our first team. But then ultimately, we've got to understand where the game's going. So there's three things in simple terms. So what hasn't changed within the game, what has changed, and then what does the future game always look like? And you've always got to have an understanding of all three of those things, and then make sure your processes are aligned to meet the needs of that. I think I'm quite fortunate, and we're quite fortunate at Wolves because it is a football club of opportunity. So a lot of people in senior positions have been in very junior positions previously, so they understand, what it actually looks like on the ground for the staff. So for myself, I started on an hour a week 14 years ago. Our sporting director started as a part-time scout 8 years ago. I head of professional football development. Started as our loans manager. So there's lots of different people that are in senior key positions now in the football club that started in very different ones. And what does that mean, I suppose, for us? It tightens up our processes because in order for us to actually improve our productivity and improve the quality that reflects our first team, that looks very different to the first team, of 2 seasons ago. You only have to look at João Moutinho and Ruben Neves, top players. But the difference now with João Gomez and Mario Lemina as your two midfield players, completely different profile. So the academy has to reflect that. So through the alignment, we're quite fortunate with our manager, Gary O'Neill, affording the opportunity for 16, 17, 18, 19-year-old boys to actually train with the first team. But to answer your question, yes, we are producing for our first team, but we're also looking at loans and sales too as our three key areas.
And I like there that you've sort of essentially explained that it's a talent development organisation at all levels, not just on the pitch, but off the pitch as well, which definitely speaks to the mindset. Coming back to you, Stephen, to talk about this sort of multi-club and all the conversations you're having, what are you hearing from the clubs is sort of the biggest challenge in creating and deploying this talent development pipeline?
I think it's one of the biggest challenges is bringing it all together and actually extracting meaning from it all, right? When we think of like the complexity of what everybody here has already spoken about, there's a lot of moving pieces, right? And as John just said, it's not just about focusing on what's happening today or what we have. It's actually about keeping an eye on the future and where you're trying to get to as well. And you think of the size of some of these organizations, we're talking about like, you know, in some of the like academy systems in the UK, we're talking about 100 coaches. Like that is a complex organization, like just that number of people to be able to bring together. How do you create that level of alignment, and how do you create that level of objectivity with 100 different mindsets, 100 different personalities coming into the mix, and how do you align all of that back to your culture? So, and then when you fold in on top of that, the amount of data that is now being collected across these clubs, whether it's, you know, I think everybody here has mentioned a different strand of data, but whether it's psychology, whether it's personality, whether it's biological age, whether it's physical capabilities, tactical capabilities, cognitive and decision-making capabilities, or even the athlete's ability to learn. I think one of the biggest issues is really, what do you do with that? How do you transform that into something meaningful? And I think, you know, I think somebody already mentioned, like, nobody has ever said, give me less information. I think Jonathan said, like, they want the right information, right? Teams want intelligence. And I think to have intelligence and to get the right information, they need answers, right? They need answers. And if you want answers, you need questions. Those questions need to be smart. They need to be specific and measurable and achievable and relevant and time bound. And I think that it's that process, I think, that is the kind of final frontier for a lot of organizations. Is, okay, well, what are those questions, right? What are the physical capabilities that we need within our club to play our style? What is the type of personality that we actually want in the playing group that we have? How are we going to demonstrate that they do have an ability to learn if we want that? Like, it's breaking all of those pieces down into something quite tangible, quite measurable, and then essentially educating. Like, this becomes a real educational problem. How do we educate the entire club around these are the most important aspects? This is how we're going to get this information. This is how we're going to assess it. This is how we're going to communicate it with the athletes. This is how we're going to empower them and involve them. And that, like, that's big, right? That's a big, like, strategic change project. But it's really exciting, right? And I think you're seeing, like, the sophistication of these clubs. Like, everybody here has talked about a level of intelligence and sophistication that's coming into a youth system that in 10 years ago was probably neglected and didn't have phenomenal coaches and didn't have the level of, like, you know, creativity and innovation being brought to it that's been brought today. And I think that's what makes this probably one of the most exciting and emerging areas in sport today.
What would you attribute that to? I mean, has the emergence of platforms like yours democratized data and allowed, you know, clubs of all sizes with varying resources to sort of better take advantage?
I mean, listen, that's certainly the role that we want to play, and that's what we're trying to do, right? We've invested over $100 million in our platform today to try and do that. But I think what's driving that is just the market, right? I think we already talked about, like, the rising cost of talent, but the financial fair play rules are making a big difference. And, you know, Ian even mentioned, like, the changes with the structure between the UK and the EU. There's all of these different dynamics that are basically pushing clubs to in ways that are making it really difficult for them to operate, and these constraints and regulations that mean that there's an ever-changing landscape for them to react and respond to. And it does mean that the reliance on external talent it's becoming harder and harder and harder, which means that you have to tighten up and improve the processes that you have. You have to be able to take the ingredients that you have within your own environment and do a way better job with them. And in some ways, like, that's actually a really good thing, because it means that we're looking inwards all the time. Instead of being able to just say, hey, let's grab that player over here, let's understand, how do we build them better? Let's understand, how do the drills that we're using impact the characteristics that we want to see on the field? How does the way that we communicate with our athletes, and how does the way we talk with them on the field, how does that impact the learning outcomes that they're getting from those sessions? Like, these are really interesting questions for, like, these clubs to ask. And you're getting really smart people now finding, like, that competitive advantage through like really smart ways. And we're certainly loving being involved in those discussions and working with guys like we have on the call today.
John, Matt, Ian, we've got a great question that's come in from Francisco in the chat, and please do keep those questions coming in. I'll endeavour to ask them when I see them. But the reason I like this question is it touches a little bit on this idea of data versus, intuition and gut feeling, these things that we always talk about in all sports, really. He asks whether you have a set of KPIs that help you identify when a player is ready for first team football. And if I sort of add on my own bit, how does that then feed into the conversations you're having with the coaching staff? I'm going to start with you, Ian.
Yeah, for sure. I think I'd go back to our profiles. I think that's where we always start. We have sort of profiles that work, as I say, through the football club. We look in and out of possession. We look physically. We look psychologically at those various areas. We have certain targets that we're looking for the players to meet in those areas. So I think that's always a good place to start. I think in the transition to first team in particular, it probably becomes a little broader for that. I think instantly the main thing that comes back to us from our first team staff or our first team players are more how they are as people, their personality, how they express themselves over in the environment. So I really think it's a balance of the two. I think for us in the academy, we have the opportunity now to look back at people that have blazed the trail and got into the first team before, and we have the opportunity to check back and cross-reference that against those role models and see progress and, again, compare their journeys. At the same time, we're very fortunate here that we have some great senior professionals in the group, Adam Lallana, James Milner, Danny Welbeck, Lewis Dunk, and they'll feed back to us a great deal about the players as people. And it's really trying to harness both aspects for us. So, again, very fortunate that we have those links. Another real strength of ours is similar to what Jonathan was saying. A lot of the staff that have gone over to the first team from an analysis perspective or a sports science perspective and even a coaching perspective have been previous members of the academy. And again, it just allows us to join those dots all the time. So specifically in answer to the question, we're always looking at our player profiles and we're always auditing the players against those profiles. And that's how we would work through the academy system. When it gets closer to the first team, then very much it's that still that comparison between the data of how they sort of react in the under-21 squad and the first team squad, but also that more subjective feedback around how they are as people and how they're coping in that environment.
So there's still that healthy mix between the sort of the data-driven and the subjective. Matt, is it more or less the same for you?
Yeah, definitely starting with those profiles. The ability to measure and monitor football vision through player profiles is essential. I think, one of the things that we're looking more closely at now is they're not really KPIs, but they're more importance factors at different age phases. So I know, Stephen, this is something Kitman Labs do with a lot of clubs, is working to understand through your own data and information on and also historical success or failures. What's really important at an under 15s to graduate to an under 16s. Is it more physical? And then the closer you get to the first team, I actually believe this is more based on opportunity. So we know for us, our head coach in the first team, if you can perform physically to a level where you can train with the first team for a week, you've got a much more higher chance of staying after that period, because you could have great technical, tactical abilities, but actually for us at this level, because of our style of play, because of the physical demand and the intensity demands that we expect from our players, that the technical tactical element comes faster for us when you're training with the group than the physical elements would. So that's like a higher weighting for us than the other stuff potentially would be. So I think understanding what it takes to move through the age phases is really important from an academy perspective, and player profiles absolutely are the cornerstone to do that. But then understanding, each head coach is slightly different. There's no real kind of, when a player can do this, this, and this, they're ready to move to the first team. A lot of it is opportunity. Injuries play a big part of, Marcus Rashford, probably the greatest example of that. And different coaches will bring academy players into the first team setup at different moments, but you need to understand what makes that happen, and how can you kind of maximize the opportunities for the kids to go into that environment.
And John, sort of just to pick up on that last point that Matt made there, because, you know, we've talked already about things like Brexit. Obviously, coaches changing. So much can change in such a short amount of time in the game. How are you working to ensure that your strategies, your indicators, your models are evergreen amongst any number of things that might change at random?
I think, again, it's knowing what the outcome, knowing what the senior team actually looks like, and having a real clear understanding of that. So as you're transitioning players through the phases, it actually reflects what that looks like. Now, for us, you've got objective things like physicality, as Matt mentioned before. There's certain physicality data metrics that are essential to play in the Premier League. So again, that has to be reflected within what we're actually developing our players to actually do. We have site characteristics of drive, regulation and openness. Again, a little bit more subjective. So that comes down to the bits that Ian was talking around, character and personality. And what we always go back to is past. So who's been successful in our program to go and play for our first team or gone on to play for somebody else's first team at a respectable level, and what are the commonalities of what they had to what the players have coming through now, and then what does the first team actually look like. So I think taking all those things into consideration, the objective things and the subjective things, I think it helps to form the outcome that you actually want. And then finally, succession planning. So having an idea of like what's above, what's below, what's outside. Is it better than what you've got in the building? Do you need to recruit in that area because you've got one younger that you can actually, accelerate maybe through the program? So I think it's having an understanding of all of those moving parts to help form the opportunity ultimately, because that's what it's going to come down to for a player to actually play for your first team. Because when you actually look back at the last probably 10 to 20 years of Premier League, Championship football, I can probably remember 2, maybe 3 players that have actually like play for the first team purely based on ability. Other than that, it tends to be opportunity to go in. What are they like? What are they like as people? What are they like as players? Can they cope? Come back out and then go back in again, and then transition their way into the senior team.
And I like that that's sort of been a consistent thread between all 3 answers there. It's sort of you're doing your job to put them in the best possible position for the time to be just right. I kind of want to sort of move next into sort of how you're working within your various leagues and sort of just understand a little bit about, you've all talked about how developing players for the club, but also developing players for the game is a huge consideration. When you're instituting your development programs, how key, if at all, is support or any role from the league in which you play? Where does that all come in? I'll start with you, Ian.
Yeah, I think we're very fortunate in that instance, Cameron. I think the Premier League are really proactive in supporting clubs and supporting staff. They run a lot of great programs, sort of development programs for coaches, for heads of coaching, for managers within the academy system. So they're very, very supportive in that. I think collectively that sort of helped challenge the thinking in the system as the EPPP, which is the process that we will work through around our academy environments has developed. I think the thinking has changed, and certainly those courses and those programs have helped challenge the thinking. I think through those environments, and again with a lot of support from the league, it's sort of given us access to other sports, other industries, different staff and events. As a result, you get exposed to new ideas, new technology, and just being network and visible in these type of environments that we share today. You meet some great people. And as I said earlier, we're really focused on the consistency alignment of our program, but very open to the growth of it. And so I think we would all be in sort of similar situations where that's really helped to fuel that. And the league has played a central role in that. Of course, we're very fortunate with the resources that the Premier League has, that's helped with the football clubs, and as Matt spoke about in terms of facilities and resources, that's been a significant increase in the English game as well, and hopefully the young people in our care can come and take full advantage of that.
And John, is the experience very similar from your perspective?
Yeah, for sure, very, very similar. I think speaking about it from personal experience, again coming through the academy system, from a coaching lens, the development programs and schemes that are available for staff now is second to none. It's outstanding. So I think that provision's definitely in place. And then I think from an academy perspective, utilising the brand of the Premier League for wider experiences like tours and tournaments, and that the games program and things like that's provided has been excellent.
And I liked especially what was said there about sort of learning from some other sports and other exposure was definitely very interesting. Matt, I'm keen to hear your perspective.
Yeah, I think the world looks to the EPP and the system in England as the gold standard. I think rightly so. I think one thing that we can do, well, there's a couple of things in the Netherlands that we're very fortunate. Whether it's facilities or levels of investment, our grassroots kind of system and standards is one of the best in the world. And I think that really helps. We're lucky to have one of the best amateur systems, especially in Europe. But I think we can do more to develop the next generation of Dutch coaches, whether that is providing more courses or increasing the standards and levels of requirements for access at the top level. I'd also like to, in an ideal world, the best under 14s coach in the world might not be the best under 15s coach in the world. So I'd like to see more age-specific programs and incentives when we get a really good understanding of the levels of maturation through the life cycle of an academy player, and actually how they can differ, and then almost effectively map and develop coaches against specific settings, rather than what I see quite a lot in different clubs, which is, okay, you perform really well as an under 13s coach, now you're kind of ready for an under 14s level or an under 15s or 16s. I don't really think it should work like that. Now, there's a lot of individual coach ambition that plays a part of that some ultimately want to be a first team coach, and that obviously plays a part in it. But I think we could be a little bit more granular as leagues, as federations, on what does a good coach at each age phase look like, and how do we develop those, rather than a more blanket approach, which is really what I kind of see at the moment.
Would you say that we're traveling in that direction, or we still have a lot of way to go?
I still think there's a long way to go, and it's just as much around the education to coaches that actually being the best under 14s coach in the world is just as important as being assistant head coach at first team level. And we have such a long way to go as a sport to understand that. I think you look at American football being a college head coach versus an NFL head coach. There's barely any difference anymore, whether it's levels of compensation or levels of ability. You go to Texas, high school football is, it's the same as being a college head coach or even an NFL coach at some areas. So I think we can learn a lot from other markets and sports, and know that actually I have a skill set that means I can do a certain job better than other jobs, and that's okay. What I don't see at the moment is enough support and opportunities from leagues and federations to almost encourage that, to make sure that, we are producing the best coaches for the right areas, because I think it's equally as important as for the coach development as it is the player development.
In mentioning sort of other sports, other markets, I want to bring Stephen back in. Stephen, obviously we've talked a lot about how the data landscape has changed, but I'm really interested to hear from your perspective how you're seeing it continue to evolve, sort of which emerging trends you're most excited about, whether that is in other markets, whether that is in other sports, and what you sort of have the most hope for moving forwards.
Yeah, I think, listen, every sport and every league and every geography is different because of the environments around them, right? And Matt just mentioned it, but the NFL is very unique in that, they're not focused on talent development because they don't have academy systems, because they have to rely on a collegiate system, and the colleges have to rely on a high school system, but they're not necessarily all connected to each other, and that places a different level of constraint on them. A lot of their innovation is around scouting and recruitment because they need to find the best talent because they can't build it. Whereas in football and specifically within the UK, I think we've seen predominance over the last number of years in investment in the talent development pipeline. And I think that the Premier League don't get enough credit globally for what they've done and for how they've been thinking about their business. And for the last 10 years, they've been investing in like building like a rising tide of capabilities and regulating the standards around what happens across the entirety of football in the UK. And it's not just the Premier League. It's not just the top 20 clubs. They're investing in almost 100 clubs and elevating the standards in each one. And they're not just investing in the athletes. They're investing in the coaches as well and creating a pathway for the coaches and, you know, creating a continued education for them and getting them access to better capabilities, better services, challenging their thinking. And they're the first league in the world to have done that and to have invested in all of their teams. They think about their business different. And I think it's pretty incredible because the vast majority of other leagues, like football playing leagues globally, they believe that, oh, talent development, that's the team's responsibilities. But I think the Premier League, what they've harnessed and understood is that actually our product is reliant on the players that we can develop. And if we cannot control the quality of those players as they emerge through, well, guess what? We can't control the quality of the product that we're selling at first team level on TV. Therefore, we cannot convert the potential TV rights, media rights, broadcast rights, sponsorship rights, etc. And that hurts their business. And I think they've been really smart because what they've realized is that if we invest in the bottom, everything comes up. And other leagues globally that have decided, hey, actually that's the team's responsibilities. Well, guess what? We'll have the Feyenoords of the world. We'll have the Ajaxes in Eredivisie who will invest more in their capabilities. But then we'll have 18 other clubs that can't afford to do that, don't know how to do that, don't have the strategic capabilities. And therefore, the product of the Eredivisie is not growing at the same speed that the Premier League is. I think it's really hindering them. And we're seeing that with other leagues globally that were superpowers 10 years ago are not as exciting products anymore because they haven't made that investment. And I think that, where we need to get to in this industry is that the leagues need to start to take control over this. And you will always have the Feyenoords, the Ajaxes, the Real Madrids, the Barcelonas that are trying to do extra on top of that. But by bringing everybody on that journey, we're going to make a difference in this industry. And that's what I think we need to see. And I think the Premier League need to be commended for what they've done because they truly are an incredible organization, very, very smart in terms of the way they've been thinking about their business.
And broadly speaking, I mean, if I was to sort of ask you to look into a crystal ball a little bit here, I mean, with the success that's coming down the line for the Premier League from that, do you see that eventually becoming the standard across the sport, across the industry? Or do you think that the gap will be so wide by that point, it'll be, much of a muchness?
No, I think. Listen, other leagues are starting to see that the impressive nature of what's happening in UK football, how competitive it is as well. Like the championship, even like EFL 1 and 2, what's happening there, and then the progression into the championship progression into the Premier League. It is unbelievably competitive now, whereas it probably wasn't that competitive 10 years ago. And all of that is coming from the development of talent and how much talent is coming through the UK market today. I think other leagues don't have a choice. If they want to be competitive, they're going to have to adopt the same types of principles and the same types of approaches. They're going to have to invest in the youth development because they're not going to be able to compete from a financial perspective and a monetary perspective in the transfer market. They're going to have to build better talent. And there'll always be leagues that will figure it out and do it smartly, and then we'll go and compete, right? I don't think anybody has a fiefdom. I don't think anybody owns excellence, right? There are people that's going to be there are people that are going to do this really, really well everywhere.
To add some colour to that, if I can, as a league, in terms of rankings by total debuts from 2018-19 to last year, England's first, the English Championship second. League ranking by debuts per club in that same period, England's first. Ranking by number of successful transitions from academy to first team, England's first. Ranking by transition per club, you can probably guess where this is going, right? The level of the gap is becoming so wide now where for us, talent development and what we do in the academy is still such a competitive advantage because of how much effort, resource, kind of work that we put into what we do. But kind of as Stephen was saying, if if as a league we don't get a grip on this pretty quickly and start putting minimum standards in place that says, do you know what, if you don't have this much resource or investment or this level of qualification as a coaching staff, etc., which costs a certain amount of resource, but actually if you don't do that, then the players that you want probably aren't going to come if they have the opportunity to go to somewhere that does have this infrastructure. Then I do think the gap is going to continue to widen.
Well, that is probably a great place to end it, having a little bit of a look into the future. And certainly, Stephen, it is a particularly good year for the championship, certainly at the moment. So what to be excited about. I'm going to pass back over to Dan shortly, but I just want to finish off by saying a massive thank you to Stephen, to Matt, to Ian, and to John. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you all. So thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, brilliant discussion. Thank you all. Also, a thank you to the audience. This will be available on demand to everyone who has registered. So if you missed something and you want to go back and check it out, you'll get an email confirmation and you'll be able to watch this on demand. And I hope to see you all at another episode of SBJ Live down the line. We do these nearly every week, so don't go anywhere, and we'll see you back here again. Cameron, brilliantly done. Thank you so much for moderating. I think it was excellent. And Ian, Stephen, Matt, and John, we couldn't do these without you. Thank you to Kitman Labs again for the support. Have a great day, everyone. We'll see you next time.